channel, where it'll be available for public viewing, which we're really looking forward to. The Wednesday seminars as a series allow us to have a chance to see research that's going on in the broader archaeological community, but also within our own department. And we're very excited to have speakers from within Leicester, including our speaker today, who is Pim Allison, who will be talking about the ArchIScan project, which she leads, which has been a major project for the university. Can I ask those of you who are joining us online, please make sure you mute your microphones. Thank you. Right, the ArchIScan project has been a really big project for the university. It's had a really exciting research. Pim is its director, among a few other projects, and we're really excited to finally get to hear about this project today. Without further ado, please welcome Professor Pim Allison.
I'm going to take that off so I can talk properly. So today, whoops, why is that not going down? Yes, as Brandon said, talking about the ArchIScan project, which has a subtitle, Automated Recording and Machine Learning for Collating Roman Ceramic Tablewares and Investigating Eating and Drinking Practices. Quite a long subtitle, but hopefully captures most of what we're doing and what I'm going to be talking about today. So I'm going to sort of run through the story so far. I'm going to talk about the rationale for this project, why I got involved in doing this in the first place, how we set it up, what processes we've used to date, what hiccups we've come across along the way, and some of the solutions to those hiccups, and then what we're continuing to do. And then finally, this is a Research Plus seminar, so it said in the advertisements, I thought it better be. So I'll talk a little bit about Research Plus. Hopefully I'll have enough time to get through all of that. Okay, so why am I doing this project? I've been, for a long time really, thinking about how we look at people's eating and drinking practices around mainly the Roman world, but also the British colonial world, and looking at different practices, how we can use the material culture to think about how people from different social groups or different cultural groups or different socio-political groups might be using the same material, but how they might use it differently. And as I say, I've done this with the British colonial world with my Outback Australia project, which is called Who Came to Tea at the Old Kinchega Homestead, which is a very remote homestead with some very delicate teacups and things. So it's about that kind of, you know, what are people doing in a place like this, drinking out of very fine teacups. And then I've done a bit of work in Pompeii as well, and I'll show you some examples of that material. But really, my main problems have been, how do we deal with the data quality? Because so often, ceramics in particular are recorded very much just so that they can be used to examine trade patterns or perhaps for dating sites. Some of the pottery I'm looking at today is particularly useful for dating sites. And that doesn't really provide us with enough information about context to start doing these sorts of studies, which are looking at different practices within a different site or between sites. And again, the recording processes, because of this interest in trade and in dating, then there haven't been comprehensive recording of much of the pottery, particularly from the Roman world, but also from other parts of other archaeological contexts as well. And again, I've been concerned about how we actually manipulate this data, how we use, I've got to move because I'm getting shone at, how we analyze, or how we collate and analyze these data, these ceramics data, so that we can in fact do things like look at intersite analyses. And then how do we present those analyses? What's the sort of way that we can present them to understand them? And I'm showing you a few examples from a network that we ran and that we published in 2018, or on the left actually is one of my Pompeii ones, which shows you shapes of tablewares from a number of tapes of terrace gelata, to be more specific, from a number of houses in one city block in Pompeii, and they're all different sized houses. The one on the right is the biggest size house, the one on the left is the smallest establishment, just a one-room establishment. And you can see that the big house, these are percentages, the big house has a great variety of vessels, particularly lots of small cups. Funnily enough, the other houses the smaller houses don't seem to have any of these small cups at all. So what are they used for? Why are the people in the big house using more small cups than the people in small houses? The one in the middle is actually done by fabric. This is a process which Martin Sterry, who formerly of this school, developed, where he used correspondence analysis and a colour spectrum to plot. So the colours actually plot the correspondence analysis. So he's looking at the assemblages of different fineware ceramics at this fort at Allingen, or we were both looking at it, I should say. And the colours show you that, for example, and I haven't got the correspondence analysis here, but the bluey colours are for the fine imported wares, the terra sigillata that's coming from Italy and from the Belgian region, whereas the browny reddy colours are mainly local handmade pots. And in fact, this area down the bottom is where we have 2 phases of commanders, the camp commanders' houses. So they seem to have the fine wares. The rest of the barracks, these workshops particularly, have more local handmade vessels. The big barracks here, which takes up a large percentage of the site, obviously has a more mixed assemblage, so it's plotting to the middle. And here's another example done by Martin Sterry for the big data on the Roman table network, where he's looked at the distribution of Samian shapes. He's taken a paper published by Stephen Willis in Internet Archaeology and plotted these shapes of terra sigillata around Britain, so that we end up, these are, again, I haven't got the details, but these are the mainly large bowls on Hadrian's Wall, some down in this area, down near Colchester, but different shapes being plotting to different parts of Britain, or different assemblages in different parts. He did this for 3 different phases. I'm just showing you one, his so-called phase 2, 80 to 160 CE, which was the kind of high point of Roman occupation of Britain. So showing you the sort of distribution. The distributions are quite different for the other 2 phases, the earlier and the later phase. Anyway, these are sorts of things that was looking at how we're going to do this on a bigger scale, more comprehensively and with better data sets. So between 2015 and 2016, myself and Martin Pitts, we organised a research network that we got funding from the AHRC. We had about 50 participants from all over the place. They were not just academic archaeologists, they were also professional archaeologists and museum curators, mathematicians, digital humanities experts and computer scientists, to think about how we can actually process Roman pottery, really, so that we can start looking into site and we can start thinking about this consumption-oriented questions rather than questions to do with trade and the production of pottery. So basically, this was the question: how can we use Roman pottery more effectively to understand eating and drinking practices across the Roman world? How can we look at the differences in the different parts? Because we end up with sort of individual sites where we've done a study, but how can we actually somehow compare them across these different sites? Obviously, Roman ceramic remains, particularly the finewares, are some of the most extensive material cultural remains from the Roman world. And so they're particularly important evidence for looking at these kind of distinctions, socio-cultural and socio-political and also regional and even social status differences within a particular site like Pompeii, for example. So the main barriers for using this wealth of artifacts to understand questions about consumption practices are the very extensiveness of what we call this big data, truly big archaeological data. And because there's so much of it, and there's a very time-consuming process to identify it, this process is also very costly. It's a specialist process. We need pottery specialists to tell us exactly what the different shapes are and the different fabrics. And so often, as I say, it's recorded rather summarily. Sampling, it's more samples are taken rather than a more comprehensive and holistic recording. And this is inappropriate, produces inappropriate data sets for more consumption-oriented analyses. So how can we develop more holistic and consistent data sets? How can we create large data sets suitable for intrasite analyses? How can we improve objectivity of the cataloguing processes? And how can we democratize the specialist process for classifying Roman pottery? I'm sorry, I left out a question mark there, sorry. Anyway, what we're saying is, how can we make this recording process more comprehensive? How can we make it more inclusive, more objective, and less costly? So sort of following on from the big data in the Roman table, 2 workshops that we organised, Professor Tukin, who's sitting here in the second row, not front row, organised developed some artificial intelligence algorithms similar to facial recognition software and used mobile phones to scan some vessels in the Jury Wall Museum to see whether in fact he developed an AI service or AI algorithms which would be able to identify these particular vessels. We just did on a few vessels and the machine could immediately distinguish between the different shapes. So this led to the setting up of the ArchIScan project based on that prototype. Professor Tukin and I worked together to produce a large ARC grant, and I tell you, it's not an easy matter producing a grant application, particularly an interdisciplinary one. It doesn't happen quickly. It took a while. So basically, with his two colleagues here, and I've lost Yevgeny Merkos's name down below, and Professor Alexander Kurbana, the three co-investigators on the ArchIScan project, and then we set up collaborations with a number of partner organizations, people who had, or organizations that had collections of pottery that we could use to develop and to test the AI system. Museum of London Archaeology, MOLAR, Vinderlander Trust, ULAS, and the Colchester and Ipswich Museum Services, CIMS for short. So we were lucky enough in 2019 to actually be awarded a very large grant for this project. The project was originally going to run till this year, but now it's been extended until 2023. So the first job to do after we had been awarded this grant was to appoint a team to work with us. We needed one postdoc in maths. We started off with Dr. Santos Nunez Tirano, who was the first postdoc, and quite a lot of the work I'm talking about today is the result of his work on this project. He left the project, I think, early 2021 and was replaced by Dr. Sharon Wang, who stayed with us for a while, and then she got a better job as a lecturer in information, so in the Department of Informatics. And we've now got Dr. Zedong Zen, who is our current postdoctoral fellow in mathematics. And we've had Dan Van Helden all along, and Victoria, who is a postdoc in archaeology, and Victoria Safara, who is the research assistant on the project. So really, there's a lot of people involved, and there's more people than this. So what I'm talking about is really what those guys have been doing, and I'm going to try and present it properly. Okay, so the project commenced in November 2019, focusing on the Roman pottery with the greatest level of conformity, and this is this so-called terra sigillata in the rest of the world, but here in Britain we call it Samian. I'm not quite sure why, but anyway, it's a form, it's an open tableware form. It's they're quite limited number of forms and fairly limited fabrics. They are made around the world, but most of the ones in Britain are made in southern Gaul. So what we needed to do was to record literally tens of thousands of Samian sherds, because we needed to train the artificial intelligence and machine learning process. And basically, the more objects the machine sees, the more it learns and the more efficient it becomes. So we developed a recording program that would be using the collections of our partner organizations, where we would have students and volunteers, people who are not experts. The whole point of this project is not to have ceramic experts during the recording, but to have people who don't have those kind of skills to be able to record Roman pottery. And then we provide with mobile phones, which is a kind of easily available tool to use to take photographs and to, I won't go into the maths of it too much, but to put the algorithms that were needed that we will need for the service. So we started our program in the Museum of London Antiquarian Collection in December 2019, and we started off by photographing near complete or complete vessels in this antiquarian collection. It was decided really at the very outset of this project between Professor Jeremy Leaversley, who was really one of the main sort of drivers of getting this project going in the first place, who was Professor of Mathematics, and Fiona Seeley, who was the former head of finds at MOLAR. So we started off photographing these whole vessels. We had both the mathematicians and the archaeologists, and also some student volunteers from Leicester taking part in this program. We only spent about 3 days in the museum. Dan and Santos set up a way where we could photograph using where we tried to take fairly regular photographs to be able to take 3 horizontal ones, 3 vertical photographs, 1 from the top, 1 from the bottom, to try and make sure that we had the same set of photographs for each vessel. As Santos, who was sort of leading on the AI side of this at the time, saying we didn't really want to think about lighting. Often when you're doing archaeological sites, you're sort of worried about very specialist lighting. The whole point here was to be able to develop a service that wouldn't be dependent on different lighting conditions. So while we set up some lighting conditions, they weren't consistent. So we ended up with after 3 days, with over 12,000 photographs of 384 Roman tableware vessels, of which over 8,000, nearly 9,000 of these were images of complete or near complete Samian vessels. So here's one example here, Dragendorf 37. Down below, we also photographed some Londonware as well while we're at it. So that was about 3 days, just a sort of a bit of a team building exercise and to collect some whole vessels, but really thinking, what are we going to do with these whole vessels? Because normally we don't find whole vessels in archaeological sites, so why would we? And also they're much easier to identify than fragments, so why would we want to do this? So this was sort of leading us into the main part of our project, which was to scan sherds. So how are we going to set up a system whereby we could do the same thing with sherds? We have a systematic way of recording them that people who weren't experts at recording pottery would be able to do. So Dan and Santos again designed this quite a neat little box, which basically meant that we photographed 6 sides of the vessel, the top and the bottom, and then four profiles around the edge. And we had a set up with a stand with the camera mounted on it so that we could do these photographs. And there's Santos showing me how to do the 6 sides. So we began our sherd scanning program in MOLA, the Museum of London Archaeology Service. We began in January 2020, and we worked there through till March 2020. This is Dan and Santos over here photographing with these cameras on a stand. Here is Evgeny Mekos here, one of the co-investigators, Alexander Paguri, my PhD student who's specializing in late Roman pottery, and a volunteer from Birkbeck. We got quite a few volunteers from Birkbeck. I'm not sure if Dan Stewart's listening, but thanks to his wife, Jen Baird, for providing us with lots of students to help us with this work in London. You might wonder why they're wearing lovely green gloves. There's nothing to do with COVID. This is because the machine, to stop the machine confusing flesh-coloured hands with the pottery. I know of no lime green Roman pottery, so I think we're quite safe here. So we not only did the six versions of the whole vessel, but we also had a magnifying glass mounted on the end of a little magnifier mounted on the end of the mobile phones, which would do a fabric, would take a photograph of the fabric. So we had, as I say, Fiona Seeley, who is the head of fines at MOLA, who is here shown with some of the volunteers explaining how to use how the site worked and where the pottery came from. Santos Nunez is explaining the AI system to our volunteers, and here's a volunteer working away with one of the fragments. As you can see, we had sort of 6 or 7 people photographing at one time, various other people. Sarah Colley standing here, who was also videoing the process. Then comes the hiccup. We're in the middle of our sort of London scanning program when COVID-19 hit. We had done, as I say, 3 weeks of scanning. We were expecting to do 6 weeks of scanning there. We had to quickly kind of abandon, pick up all our gear and come quickly back to Leicester. So we now had a real problem. This was the way we had planned the project, that we'd have lots of volunteers, we'd be lots of people working. The whole point was to democratize this process so that we could have large teams of people working together and working on cataloguing, on recording, on photographing the ceramics or the sherds, so that we would have a considerably large database that we could work with. So what we're going to do during the global pandemic. Well, Dan and Santos had always been putting their heads together. This is actually not them putting their heads together during the pandemic, obviously, but it's a photograph from before there. But if you think of them virtually putting their heads together and thinking about how are we going to resolve this problem, and they devised a cunning plan. they decided to use profile drawings from Webster and Daniel's Roman Samian pottery in Britain, and then to use those profile drawings to create artificial 3D shapes of Samian forms. So here we have, for example, this is form 36. Here's a blow up of this form, and then to make this kind of 3D simulation of that form, and then to photograph it. I don't know how they photograph it. Dan might be able to explain this, but so they took lots of photographs of that form, not just the whole form as it was, but with bits broken out of it as we would normally find it. So they made lots. Santos made lots of different simulated shapes or vessels of the same shape, but with different bits missing. So they're all slightly different. So basically, by using simulation, we were able to create a much larger data set of now simulated vessels, so that the machine could now be trained on fewer of the real vessels. We weren't able to get fewer of the real vessels, but we could now build up a data set of simulated vessels. And we, Santos used 3 different methods. And again, these are sort of maths. I'm going into the maths side now, so you have to excuse me, and other people might have to explain where I've gone wrong. So there were 2 different procedures used. One's called Matplotlib, and the other's called Blender. And then we had 2 versions of Blender, one where we just had the plain vessel and one where the decoration was included. And over here you can see this one is simulated with Matplotlib, this one is simulated with Blender, and this one's simulated with Blender with decoration added here and here. And then these are the original vessels which were used. As you see, they're not quite broken in the same way, so there's a whole lot of variation within each form. And at the same time, we didn't use all the forms. As I said, we had over 200 forms that we had photographed at the Museum of London, but these were reduced down to 162 vessels on the basis of that some of the forms we just didn't have enough examples of, and also some of the forms we could put together. A Dragendorf, if anyone's a Roman pottery specialist here, Dragendorf 18 and Dragendorf 31 are often put together anyway, so we put these together. So we came up with 5,373 images of 162 pots. Those are the real pots. And then the simulated ones, we ended up with 9,000, images, should I say, not pots, images with the Plotlib, 12,600 with Blender 1 and 11,700 with Blender 2. Now, this is sort of more than we had to start with. It's doubled the number of vessels that we had for each simulation, but they're still fairly low numbers when you're talking about facial recognition or image recognition systems. But we did have a certain amount of success with this, so I'm going to take you through and show you how we did this. And again, excuse me if I don't explain the maths very well, but I'll try and do my best. So what we did is we needed to evaluate the impact of training the AI system by using these simulated data, and also to see what sort of quality how the quality of the simulations affected it. We have, as I said, 3 different sets of simulations, Matplotlib, and then the 2 versions of Blender, and also how we could mitigate against problems with accuracy. So Santos and Evgeny, I think, were working on this using off-the-shelf neural network architectures. There are 4 different ones there, and I don't know what they all mean, so I won't read them out. But the one that's important to watch is Inception v3. And what we have here is they did experiments first by training just on the whole pots, and that's this lot here, ImageNet here, and then with Matplotlib, and then with Blender 1 and the real vessels as well. Twice training with just the simulated ones, and then the simulated ones and the real ones. And you see, as we go through, they become more and more accurate. And they ran each experiment 20 times. That was using different pots, because we had all these different simulated vessels of the same form, as it were. So we could use different examples and different photographs, take photographs from different angles as well. So as you will see, the accuracy of the identification improved remarkably as we used the better simulated data over here. And the other thing too is the bands are quite separate here, the error bands, whereas they're much closer up here as well. So that's another indication that the classifier is fairly stable. So this is a way of showing basically what we get with Inception. As I said, Inception v3 was, if I just go back to that slide, that's the one that seems to be coming out on top all the time. So looking at what happens when we just use just the real images and no pre-training with simulated images. Here are the different shapes down here. This shows you the level of accuracy. The yellow, the red down the middle highlighted are the correct identifications. It's identified the vessel as Dragon Dwarf 13, etc. It's mixed up Dragon Dwarf 13 a bit, 18, so with Dragon Dwarf 36, which are these two flattish vessels. But we've got an accuracy somewhere between 60 and 89%. And then here is the same thing, but now pre-trained with Blender 2. And here you can see the accuracy. It's pretty accurate with this deep bowl here, D33, and most of the others are over 70, most of them in the 80% range accuracy. So we're getting a much better accuracy by using these simulated vessels. So as I said, I would say what we've done so far in terms of publication. We've been able to demonstrate that this simulation does improve the accuracy of the machine. And so we've published a maths paper in the journal Entropy. We published that last year. We've also put the data online. I'll come back to that again shortly. And recently we submitted a paper to an archaeology journal, to the Journal of European Archaeology. Haven't heard back yet whether they'll publish it, but that's sort of a more archaeological version of this process. So while it's very useful to show that the simulation does work and does increase the accuracy of the identification of the machine, it's not particularly useful for archaeologists to know that you can identify a whole pot. What we really need to do is to see if we can do the same process with sherds. So really, since November 2020, we have been carrying on with our sherd scanning program. This is when we could first start going back into the field again, as it were. Dan and Victoria and Santos and Evgeny went up to Vindolanda to do some scanning of their collection up there. We couldn't have any volunteers at that time. So again, our progress has been much slower because we haven't been able to use large numbers of volunteers. So that was what they did in November 2020. And then sort of from spring, I think, through the summer of 2021, we started bringing the material to Leicester so that we could work on it in Leicester. And then over the summer, a number of Leicester students got involved. And David Griffith here, who is the the pottery specialist, came to Leicester to help us. One of the things that we found that was sort of not working terribly well was that we were getting the pottery specialist to identify the particular fragments from the photographs after we'd photographed them. We've now realized it's much better to get them in beforehand and get them to actually identify them up front so that we know, because this is we're still training the machine, so we need to know what vessels it's looking at from the outset. So we brought, as I say, over 2020, we brought a lot of, over the summer of 2020, we brought a lot of material to Leicester. This, of course, doesn't work so well when the labs are being used during the term. So we came up with another cunning plan, which was to kind of outsource the scanning, and got our two pottery experts, Fiona Seeley here and David Griffith here, to work at their local sites. So Fiona worked at Molar with volunteers from London. We'd had lots of volunteers who were very interested in being part of the project and kept asking us when we were coming back to London. And we weren't very keen about going back to London at this point, but we were able to get Fiona to set up a program so that she would supervise the scanning, and she would also identify the vessels as we went along. And then David Griffith did the same last November, October in Vindolanda. And then now we're working in the lab again, in the bone lab, with the ULAS material, and we have Liz Johnson from ULAS who is doing the identifications. I don't think she's in that picture, is she? She was normally sitting somewhere down there. So we have a number of volunteers coming in on Tuesdays and Wednesdays doing the ULAS material, and then we'll be going back to Vindolanda in a couple of weeks to do some more, and David will be supervising that. And then after Easter, we'll be doing the Colchester material. And then we'll see whether we've got enough vessels. Now, of course, one of the major problems in developing simulated sherds is that we have such an infinite variety of sherds. We were able to kind of manufacture, we had infinite varieties of whole vessels, but we've got even more, a greater range of shapes of different sherds. So we have a greater chance for there to be error in the identifications. So what we really don't know, we sort of know how a pottery specialist identifies a vessel, but we really don't know how the AI machine actually does its identifications. What does it see? How does it make its identifications? And why does it make mistakes? Why does it not get 100% accuracy? Why does it? What is causing the different errors? So there are some things called explainable AI. There are a number of approaches, and I've got these on the right. Statistical fault location, ProPNet and GradCam, which are systems which are used for visualizing the inner workings of the neural networks to identify the part of the image that's diagnostic for the machine. For example, here, a dog, it's this part that tells you it's a dog. I didn't put the sheep one up because I thought the sheep one didn't look like a sheep to me. I'll come back to that. Anyway, so basically here, how much of this can we block out and still know what the form is? And we tested some of the pottery specialists on this, and they find it rather difficult, actually. And then these other ones, the same sort of things happening, and this one is showing you what aspects of it it's identifying it. Now, I have to confess, I stole these images from Dan's Computer Applications in Archaeology conference paper last year. Thank you, Dan. So where are we now? In terms of what's happening on the maths side, Zedong Zhang, as I said, he only really started not January, middle of January, and he started to create data sets of simulated sherds. So he's doing the same sort of thing as Santos did with whole pots, and he's taking a pot and he's breaking it up and making a whole lot of simulations. And these are eventually, I think he started now to do it as an automated system where it will automatically simulate these sherds. So he's been doing it with Matplotlib to date, and I think he's just started to do it with Blender. And then we've also got Titania Tukin, who is an honorary associate of the project, and she's looking at doing developing automated measuring processes. So we need to know, as I said, I'm interested in what assemblages people use, and some of these pots might be the same shape, but they might be quite different in size. Some of the plates are huge, some are small. So we need to know the sizes of these vessels as well. So she's organizing, as you see, most of our photographs have a scale in them, and she's working out a system where they can automatically count the pixels, as it were, and tell you the radius of a vessel. Even one that looks like this, you can hardly see the radius at all. So that's really just where we're up to at the moment. We've got lots of sort of irons in the fire going. We're scanning in these various collections. We've got various sort of maths projects going on. We've got the explainable AI. We've got the simulation of the sherds, and then we've got the developing an automated process for measuring vessels. So what do all the participants in this project get out of it? What do the partners get out of it? What do other professionals, would they get out of it? What do the volunteers get out of it? And what might some of our followers get out of it? Well, the partners and also other archaeologists, what we're hoping to do is we will end up with some sort of annotated data, we'll end up with an annotated database of Samian ware. We're expecting that we will provide the individual partners with an annotated database with all the images that we've taken and the identifications that go with them. But we're also, and as I mentioned, we've already started doing a GitHub repository where we've got the whole pots, and I'm just showing you a screenshot of this repository, which has all the simulated images that we've created, that Santos has created, are stored there. They're publicly available. All the whole pots from Museum of London are also there, although they are only accessible by request, basically, because they are still protected as part of their collection. But ultimately, we hope the Archaeological Data Service is another partner on this project, and we expect that we'll be able to set up an annotated database of all our images on ADS. I'm not sure if they're going to, they know. We've talked about the size of this, and originally they talked, oh, we put it on Figshare, and I said, I think we worked out it was 50 terabytes, and I think Figshare, the whole of Figshare is only 50 terabytes, and so we would have taken up the whole of the university's storage facility if we'd put it there. So we're looking at putting it on the Archaeological Data Service. Dan is also developing an ontological database, which will be able to, because obviously we're dealing with different collections, and all their data that they've got on these collections, their context data, is done in a different way. It's whenever anybody makes a database for their site, it's always different from somebody else's. Those are when they make relational databases. The thing about an ontological database, and what I'm showing you here, is a diagram that Dan drew up for the one he compiled for the German sites, the military sites I was talking about earlier, for the Big Data on the Roman Table project. And so what it is that you can keep adding categories to it. You don't have to sort of go back and redesign the whole thing like you would have to do with a relational database. An ontology or an ontological database is an infinite database that can be added to, and you can say, well, this category at that site equals this category at that site. I've got it right, haven't I, Dan? And correct me if I'm wrong. So we're looking at, Dan's got another nice drawing, which is not available digitally yet, of how he's going to build this for the Samianware. So that those two, that will be hopefully all our images will be able to be put into an ontological database. That's a big project in many ways in its own right. And of course, what this means then is that people will be able to share data between sites much more easily. They'll be able to share, you'll be able to get the data from Mola to talk to the data from Vindolander, etc. And we also hope that while we do this, we're going to be running some sample analyses and to get people to think about how we can carry out different types of approaches, different types of analyses with Roman pottery, rather than just trade and fabric or production investigation. But the most important part of this project is that we hope that we can develop an AI tool for future recording. This tool that we developed for Samian we'll be able to use for Samian for other sites. And again, as I said before, the more the machine sees, the more it learns. So there's already been a project done. Joe Appleby was involved a little bit with Professor Jeremy Leavesley looking at skeletons. So it doesn't just apply to pottery. Hopefully this principle, at least, if not the machine itself, will be able to be used for lots of other kinds of archaeological data. So that's what we're hoping the partners and other archaeologists, be they academic archaeologists or professional archaeologists and people in museums, will get out of this project. So the other part of the Research Plus is the volunteers and the followers. Now, Victoria Safara is responsible for managing public engagement and also for monitoring the impact. And I've just included some examples here. Here's some volunteer feedback from one of the volunteers from Mola, who writes, I have achieved more than what I thought. In my mind, I thought I would just be around some professionals helping out. I, in fact, was allowed to get stuck in and help out with an exciting project, an immense honour and experience. This has been a great step towards an archaeology-based life for me. So that was sort of just, we've got a number of these, I think, Victoria, but that one I quite liked. And then we've done quite a few public events, even though we've been in lockdown for much of the time. Victoria gave a talk to the Oadby and Wigsby fieldwork group. Sarah Colley, as I said, has made a YouTube video based on the project. This is a clip from her video, which is what is this project about. And if you haven't seen it already, I suggest you go and have a look. It's got really good music. Sarah Colley's brother is a jazz pianist, and he's made the music to accompany it, so it's nice. I like it. And we had the Being Human Festival last November, where we had some sort of public engagement activities where members of the public came to two locations, one at the university and one at the New York Museum, came and sort of did a bit of hands-on stuff. They didn't really do any actual recording, but they sort of had a look and see what we were doing. And we've actually got some volunteers who've come to join us since that festival. And then I've been in Australia for much of this time, but I gave a talk to the local St Columbia school in New South Wales, Australia. This is, you can't see it very well, but this is a very nice thank you letter where they all wrote and thanked me for coming and presenting to them personally, they said. And then we've got quite a few followers on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. These are just the figures from 2020. Not a huge number, but some people following us, and we seem to have some regulars following us on Facebook. And we need to do that statistics again soon for 2021 for the research fish exercise, which is what we have to do for UK research funding. Okay, so that's probably really about all I want to say, except as I said before, there's been lots of people involved in this project. I'm really just standing here as a spokesperson for all these people, lots of mathematicians. I've mentioned the 3 co-investigators and the number of postdoctoral research associates who've been part of this project. But there's also 2 of Ivan's PhD students who've been doing the explicable, I keep saying explicable, but they call it explainable in maths, explainable artificial intelligence. And then we've got our archaeologists, Dan and Victoria, and then Sarah Colley is also actually an archaeologist, although she's sort of coming back as a kind of media person who's interested in recording archaeological projects. And then we've got our pottery consultants, again, archaeologists, Nick Cooper and Liz Johnson from ULAS, and Fiona Seeley, who, as I say, was formerly at Mola. Both her and Sarah are honorary associates of the department. And then David Griffiths, who is a consultant archaeologist with his own business, who's helping us out with Vindolanda and with Colchester. And then volunteers from a number of different organisations and universities, Mola, Vindolanda Trust, Leicester Fieldworking, Colchester Museum. We'll be working with them. They haven't had any of their volunteers taking part yet, but they're very keen that some of their local volunteers will be involved in our project. And we'll be doing a public presentation in Vindolanda in the middle of, or sort of around the 17th and 19th of March, and then we'll probably be doing another one at the Colchester Museum. It was scheduled for Easter, but we're sort of behind, so we were putting it off until next year. And then as you see, a number of University of Leicester, Birkbeck, UCL, King's College, and another student from York will be joining us in Vindolanda. And then I mustn't forget to thank Arts and Humanities Research Council, who paid for all this, and then the partners who've all contributed both the space, the people, the material, the experts, etc. So thank you.
Really good. Thank you so much, Pim. It was a really excellent talk. All right, we'll now open up to questions from both the in-house and online audience. Remember, for questions that come up from the live audience, you could just work the question into your answer. That way there's no issues with people not being able to hear your question. Okay, if you're joining us online, you can use the raise hand feature, type a question into the chat. You know how that goes. We already have one question here in the live audience.
Ruth, hi.
Thank you. That's quite an amazing project. I just wondered if you could sort of enlarge a bit on the ways in which you see this being used in actually analysing and interpreting pottery assemblages.
Well, the AI thing won't do an interpretation. It will collate the pottery. It'll identify, if you like. It'll identify, you know, obviously you have to give it the information before it can work. So what we're doing at the moment is we're giving it the information on the various forms so that hopefully it'll be able to identify Samian. We've had people from various other sort of sites in Greece and stuff saying, oh, come and work with us. I'm thinking, well, hang on a minute. It's going to be a long way down the track before this machine's going to work on another body because it needs the huge body of training data.
Once you've got all this data, that's, you know, I mean, I'm aware that this is sort of still collection and identification. Yeah. But once you've got that, once you've got the ability to do it, or the machine has the ability to do it, what sort of things do you how do you see it opening up your analysis and interpretations for the people who are then making use of it?
Well, I mean, I see its best use really is both Roman and British colonial, where you've got, I mean, I'm a bit obsessed with ceramics, I suppose, but where you've got these huge bodies of ceramics, they're coming out of the same factories in many ways, like they're coming from Stafford here for the British colonial pottery. They're coming from South Gaul, and then there are particular factories in Italy and Eastern Turkey, and some in it's Crete and place like that. But so what are if we could actually if we could do this for Britain, and then there's another project actually called Arcade, which is has done some collection of Italian sigillata. If we can marry these up with our annotated database, or if we can actually, you could take our set, and then I'll have to correct me if I'm wrong here, we could take our ontological database, and somebody which is what I was hoping to do when I was hoping to get a European research grant, was work on some stuff from Turin and Pompeii and say, okay, what sort of shapes have we got here, and what shapes have they got in Turin and what they got in Pompeii, and are they the same or are they different? Are they doing the same things with their food, basically? Are they eating, like big plate, open wide plates? Why would people have wide plates as opposed to bowls? There's a lot of work done with this with medieval pottery and Romana and British colonial pottery, but not so much with Roman pottery. Why do we have those more decorated deep bowls up on Hadrian's Wall? We don't have them in London, for example. These sorts of things. Why are people using different vessels in different contexts? What's driving that? Is it their culture? Is it their social status? And I could talk about this for ages, but the little cups that I mentioned are not cups. And in fact, when we had our big data on the Roman table project, we started calling them cuppy bowly things, because actually Geoffrey Dannell, who I mentioned did this book on Samian, he suggested that they are not cups, because we always think of them as wine cups. You go into a museum and it shows them as wine drinking cups. They're probably sauce bowls. And I like to think that Romans were more like the Spanish. They had tapas with these little sauce bowls. And the reason why I get them in the big houses in Pompeii is because they're used for dipping sauces. They're not drinking vessels. And so I'm hoping that we can start looking at these kind of differences. Obviously, some sort of looking at trace elements will help as well. And we certainly did a lot of that with the big data on the Roman table. But the problem we kept coming up with was each site has its own way of recording and its own and it's not recording holistically. So if you're only recording pottery because you want to identify the date of the site, you're not going to record it holistically. So we've got one Dragendorf 18, let's throw the rest away, basically. And you find that certainly I know a Japanese project in Pompeii which was excavating the spoil heaps because a lot of this stuff got thrown away. So the idea is that when if you think of a site with limited funds, and if you've got to get in specialists to identify every vessel, you're going to sample it. But if you can do it more democratically, all the volunteers and all the students who are on the project can identify the pottery, you can record a lot more of it. Does that answer your question a bit?
Yeah, that's great. That's fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah, really interesting, and thanks very much. The neural network architectures that you talked about at the beginning, you said the Inception VC seemed to be the best. Why was that? Is it just because it's better suited to the subject matter, or is there some fancy mathematical answer that I can't quite understand now?
I have to defer to Ivan to answer that.
Well, I think a very simple answer is that because in this particular architecture, they explore different types of processing embedded in the same architecture. It's one of the most computationally expensive one,
Okay.
and because you have a broader hypothesis search, space basically, that's why it becomes better. But again, at the same time, you see those complex things need to have large volumes of data to learn from.
Okay, thank you.
Definitely have time for more questions, online or off.
No online ones.
I have a quick question for you, Pim. Is there, or was there any kind of precedent archaeology for doing something like this, identifying types of artifacts with AI?
Yeah, I think and again, I think our one is different in its machine learning. There's the Arcade project has developed a system whereby they take a vessel, and I'm going to get it right what they do. They've got a simulated vessel, and then you try and plot the sherd onto it. So there's no machine learning, it's really straight identification. You're not training the machine to actually make the identification itself. You need still a person to identify it. And there was a project, no, I got it wrong. Sorry, Dan.
So they are using machine learning, but they are basing it on, their training set is the profile. So it's a traced profile that the machine learns rather than just a bad photo.
Okay, okay. But I thought they still have to match it up, don't they, by hand?
Well, what they do is they take the photo and they trace the
Oh,
photo
by hand. They trace the photo by hand. Yeah.
The machine doesn't use the, as far as I understand it, the underlying photo. It just uses the trace profile.
Okay.
So that they're basically doing a bit of the searching by the human do a bit of the searching and then reduce the complexity for the machine to understand this.
Yeah. Okay. And then there was another project in Israel, which I think was sort of a predecessor of the arcade one, where they were, what were they doing? I can't remember now. They were mounting. They had each pot. I shouldn't laugh at. And they had a sort of very sort of sophisticated photographing system where they had to mount each sherd and then take a record of it. I'm not sure what they did with it after. I think it was again looking at profiles, wasn't developing automated profiles.
Yeah, I don't remember that one.
And then if you're interested in, as part of the Big Data in the Roman Table Network, our colleagues in Exeter, they had a system whereby they went through the profiles. I mean, it was really just testing how accurate, really, rather than actually doing it. And they had a system whereby looking, and I have to remember now, this is Jacqueline Christmas and Martin Pitt's paper, where they were taking profile drawings and just seeing what we called a bowl, what we called a cup, what we called, and so they were looking at it from that perspective and seeing whether in fact people were consistent. So they were using a digital system, if you like, I can't remember what it was called now, to see how consistently people identified stuff. So yeah, it's moving in this way, I think. And Dan,
there was another paper where by Americans. There was a team from the United States where they looked at the drawings, like they looked at the patterns painted on shells.
Yeah, looked at pottery from where is it? Sort of the southwest. Sorry. And then there's another Austrian team actually who are starting to do something similar, or they're thinking along these lines. So yeah, I mean, I think it's happening. And, hopefully it will happen in all directions, really. Yeah.
Very good. Definitely have time for more questions. Here we go.
Yes, you.
Was the laser scanner more accurate recording the details of the shell or no?
We call it scanning. We don't know why we call it scanning. It's really photographing. We're taking a photograph. We're not scanning. We're actually taking a photograph with the camera. Yeah. So we've got fairly basic phones. They're not anything special at all. They're just ordinary. Here we are. Dan's got one there that we take the photos with, and so we've got a whole lot of photographs taken with that.
So when the machine, if you're able to recognize the shell, will it be more accurate by using the laser scanner or not?
Sorry.
Probably. It wouldn't totally be more accurate, but the problem is you need a laser scanner
on
one side, whereas this is fairly ubiquitously available, and so it's easy to distribute and to have other people use it. If you acquire a laser scanner, that's quite a big barrier to entry. If we can get it to work with this, it's much more easily accessible.
And more people, you can have lots of people photographing on a site. I keep thinking of Sagalassos in Turkey. I don't know if anyone's been there. Huge Roman site, masses and masses of pottery, which just doesn't get recorded because there's too much of it, basically. Although they are recorded, they're putting in bags. I think they're barcoding bags of it, basically. But there's a lot of stuff being found in situ that could easily, in fact, what's his name now? Pablo, who is the director of that project, was a member of the Big Data in the Roman Table project.
Okay, and we also have a question from Emma online, who asks, have the pottery experts found that being involved in this project has impact on how they record and interpret pottery themselves?
They're doing that at the moment, actually. This is something that's another side of, we're looking at them to sort of think, you know, how do they look at it? We are comparing how they, in fact, I think, have we had any results back yet, Dan? I don't know. We have from David.
About them looking at the photos.
Yeah. So that's one aspect of it, but the other aspect is that we will actually at some point probably get together and do a paper about that, actually. Thank you, Emma. Did you hear me?
Yep.
Yep, thank you.
We have time for another question, happily. Here we go.
Is the hope for this project for it just to be used by archaeologists in like a professional setting, so in the field and stuff, or is the hope for it to also be available to the general public? So if they're digging around in their garden and they find a piece of pottery, to be able to identify that?
Well, ideally the latter, right? Like that's what you want. Like you want to automate the identification process and make it as close as possible to what an expert would say. Like the question is whether we can. Oh, and then there is another thing like which you didn't mention. Like there are so many facets to the project, but like the ambition was also to make these tools evolving over time. So that when, let's say, an expert says, look, probably it's a different class now, but you're not having the correct answer, and then the system should pick it up from that feedback and incorporate that knowledge into it, basically make it a community-driven tool. So that's part of the ambition.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So that, you know, I mean, but I'm still thinking about how somebody with their garden, they need to have the algorithm on their phone, basically. So you need to sort of download the algorithm like you download another app, I suppose.
And also, it rather depends on how successfully the tool will be. If it can do everything, then that's great. If it can only do the more common forms, it could still be considered, but it might not be as interesting to someone with limited knowledge, because then the machine might say, well, I don't know this one. Yeah, that doesn't get you very far.
Yeah. And you'd have to know it was Samian to start with. Well, at the moment you would have to, but you know, the sky's the limit. Yeah, it could be. We could be using it. I mean, I think probably another. I mentioned British colonial pottery. The other thing that's found all around the world, or not around the world, around the Roman world, is amphorae. And I think to do this with amphorae as well would be really, really useful.
So that's what Arche did, wasn't it?
Yeah, but not to use it for our system. To combine their material with our system to train it. But yeah, it would always have to be trained on every different set.
I'm going to squeeze. I think we can squeeze in one more question. One online or offline. Kind of following on from Emma's question, has there been an instance where a specialist thought it was some type of pottery, and then your system thought it was another type, and the specialist changed their mind and agreed with your system?
Not yet.
But we had this discussion when we instructed kind of specialists to help us with this explainable business.
Yeah.
And like you could see that they were not sure themselves at some point, like that, like because like not about the particular piece, but when the machine started to block certain, or like occlude certain parts of the images, we reached a point where they sort of wouldn't be able to tell, but the machinist thing was still progressing. I don't remember like exactly, but there was.
I'm not sure whether it was. We don't know whether the machine was correct though, or not, do we? That's the issue. We'd need to find out whether the machine. But certainly the machine was making an identification where the pottery specialists wouldn't be so definite about it, and that's a really interesting kind of place that we need to go, and that's what the guys are doing at the moment, I think. Working out how far they can go with how much of a piece of pot to actually identify it and how far the machine can go.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much for the presentation. I thought it was excellent. I think you did a really good job of demonstrating kind of the team effort of this process, both in your presentation and in the Q&A.
Yeah, especially the Q&A.
But I thought it was brilliant. Thank you so much for taking the time to come speak for us. There is no seminar next week because of UCU strike action, but we'll be back in a fortnight. Those of you who are with us in person are welcome to come join us at the Mark de Wellington for a couple of pints. Pim will be there and we can continue discussions. But before we go, can we have one last round of applause for our speaker, please?
And the team.
And the team, thank you. Yeah. Hold on.